I thought the exhaustion from a 10-hour shift was the heaviest thing I would carry that day, until I saw the paper taped to the front door of my dead mother's house. It was an eviction notice, before my keys could touch the lock. My stepfather pulled the door open, blocking the warmth inside. He didn't look like a grieving husband anymore. He just looked cold. "Get out," he said, staring right through me. "I sold the house." The tape on the door was blue. It was painter's tape. The kind meant to peel away without damaging the surface, which felt like a sick joke considering what the paper beneath it said. I stood on the porch of the house where I had learned to walk, holding a bag of groceries that suddenly felt leaden in my arms. My shoulders ached from a 10-hour shift at the logistics center, a dull throb that usually vanished the moment I stepped across this threshold. But today the door was not a welcome, it was a barrier. I leaned in, squinting at the bold black text. "Notice to vacate." The words did not make sense. My brain tried to reject them, like a mismatched puzzle piece. This was my mother's house. She had died 3 months ago. I lived here. I had lived here for the last 6 months of her life, changing her sheets, blending her food, holding her hand while the morphine dragged her under. I had not left. The front door opened before I could find my keys. My stepfather, Frank, stood in the entryway. He was wearing a polo shirt I had never seen before, something crisp and bright blue, tucked into khaki pants. He looked younger than he had at the funeral. He looked rested. I stared at him, the grocery bag slipping down my forearm. "Hey, Frank," I said, my voice cracking. "What is this on the door?" He did not step aside to let me in. He filled the frame, his hand resting high on the jamb. He looked at me with a flat, terrifying calmness. "Get out," he said. I blinked. "Excuse me. I sold the house," he said. "You need to get out." The sentence hung in the humid afternoon air. I sold the house. It sounded impossible, like saying he had sold the sky or the pavement. "Frank," I said, trying to force a laugh that came out as a dry heave. "What are you talking about? You cannot just sell the house. I live here. Mom, your mother is dead. Lillian." He cut in. The cruelty of it slapped me harder than a physical blow. He said it without a shred of grief, just a fact to be filed away. "She left everything to me," he continued, his eyes drifting over my shoulder to the street. "I am the sole owner. I have a buyer with cash who wants a quick close. I need the place empty." I pushed past him. I did not mean to shove him, but panic had seized my motor functions. I dropped the groceries on the porch and squeezed through the gap between his body and the doorframe. "Hey," he shouted, turning to grab my arm. I stumbled into the living room and froze. Boxes. There were cardboard boxes everywhere. But they were not just boxes. There were men in the room, 2 of them, wearing gray shirts with a generic moving company logo. They were taping bubble wrap around the legs of the dining room table, my mother's table, the table where we had eaten Christmas dinner every year since I was 4. "Stop," I screamed. The movers looked up, bored. One of them held a tape gun, the serrated edge glinting under the chandelier. Frank marched in behind me. "I told you. Lillian, it is done. These gentlemen are helping clear the property. You cannot do this," I yelled, my voice rising to a pitch that hurt my throat. "This is an illegal eviction. You have to give me 30 days. You have to go to court." Frank sighed, the sound of a parent dealing with a toddler. I shook my head, backing away from him until my hips bumped against something solid. It was the cedar chest. My heart hammered against my ribs. The cedar chest. It was a heavy, dark wood chest that had sat under the bay window for 40 years. It was not just furniture. It was the vault. Inside were my mother's diaries, her letters from her own mother, the baptismal gowns, and the weird little trinkets she could not bear to throw away. It was the physical heart of our family history. I spun around and threw my arms over the lid. "No, you are not taking this." Frank signaled to the movers. He nodded his head toward me, a silent command to remove the obstacle. "Lillian, do not make a scene," Frank said. "It is embarrassing." "Embarrassing," I shouted. "You are stealing my mother's life." "It is my property," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It is all my property." One of the movers stepped forward. He was a big man, smelling of stale coffee and sweat. "Ma'am, we have a job order here. Do not touch it." I warned him. Frank walked over and gripped my upper arm. His fingers dug into the soft flesh, hard enough to bruise. "You have 10 minutes to pack a bag of your clothes and get out of my sight," he hissed close to my ear. "If you are not gone, I am calling the sheriff to have you removed for trespassing. I am a tenant," I cried, trying to wrench my arm free. "You are a squatter," he spat back. "You never paid rent. You have no lease. You have nothing." The room spun. The legal terms bounced off my skull. Rent, lease, squatter. I had quit my job in the city to come here and care for her. I had drained my savings to pay for the groceries and the copays that Frank claimed he could not afford. I had paid in blood and time, and now he was asking for a receipt. I looked at the mover. "Please," I said, my voice trembling. "Please, my mother just died. This is her chest. It has her letters inside." The mover looked at Frank, then back at me. He looked uncomfortable. Shifting his weight, Frank released my arm and smoothed his shirt. "Pack a bag." "Lillian, you are wasting everyone's time." I ran up the stairs, my breath coming in jagged gasps. I did not go to my room. I went to hers. I needed the papers. I needed proof. I tore open the nightstand drawer, but it was empty. I checked the closet shelf where she kept the metal lockbox. Gone. The room had been stripped. Her perfume bottles were missing from the vanity. The quilt she had stitched by hand was gone from the bed, replaced by a bare mattress that looked like a bleached bone. He had been planning this, while I was at work, grieving and exhausted. He had been erasing her. I ran to my room, the guest room now, I supposed, and grabbed my duffel bag. I shoved clothes into it blindly. Jeans, underwear, a heavy sweater, my laptop. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the zipper. I grabbed my toothbrush from the bathroom, my phone charger, and the photo of my mom and me at the beach that sat on the dresser. From downstairs, I heard the screech of packing tape. I thundered back down the stairs, the bag banging against my leg. In the living room, the cedar chest was already on a dolly. They were tilting it back. "Stop." I screamed again, lunging for it. Frank stepped in my path. "Get out! Lillian!" "Where are you taking it?" I demanded, tears finally spilling over, hot and stinging. "Tell me where you are taking her things, storage," he said vaguely. "Or the dump. Depends on what is worth keeping." The dump. Something inside me fractured. I looked at this man who had eaten at our table for 15 years, who had held my mother's hand in the hospital, who had played the role of the grieving widower so perfectly. I saw him clearly for the first time. He was a predator who had simply been waiting for the prey to stop moving. "I will stop you," I said. "I will sue you." He laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. With what money he knew. He knew exactly how much was in my bank account because he had watched me spend it on her hospice care. I walked out the door. I did not look back at the movers. I could not bear to see the cedar chest rolling away on those rubber wheels. I stepped over the groceries still sitting on the porch, the milk likely sweating in the heat, and walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and screamed until my throat tasted like copper. The first night, I slept on Sarah's couch. Sarah was a shift supervisor at the logistics center, a woman with kindness in her eyes and a one-bedroom apartment that smelled of vanilla candles and cat litter. She made me tea, but I could not drink it. I sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wall, my phone clutched in my hand like a weapon. "I do not get it," Sarah said softly, sitting on the floor near me. "How can he just kick you out? That is your house too, right?" I thought so. I whispered, Mom always said the house was for me. She told me that 1,000 times. Did she write it down?" Sarah asked. I nodded. She had a will. I know she had a will. She kept it in the blue folder in the study, the blue folder that was likely in a dumpster right now. I opened my banking app. The numbers stared back at me in stark, unfeeling font. $212. That was it. That was the sum total of my life at 33 years old. I needed a place to stay. Sarah had a cat. and I was allergic. My eyes were already itching. I could stay a night or two, but not a month. I checked the prices of short-term rentals. Even the cheapest motel on the highway was $60 a night. A storage unit for the few things I might be able to salvage would be another $100 a month. A lawyer, a consultation fee alone was $300. I did the math in my head, and the numbers turned into a cage. Grief was supposed to be emotional. It was supposed to be crying in showers and looking at old photographs. No one told me that grief was actually accounting. It was survival math. It was calculating how many hours of work I would have to miss to go to the courthouse, and how much gas it would take to drive there, and whether I could afford to eat lunch if I paid for a copy of a document. I fell asleep that night calculating the cost of my own existence. The next morning, I called Frank. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a coffee shop, stealing their Wi-Fi, and dialed the number I knew by heart. He answered on the second ring. "Hello, Frank," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk." "There is nothing to talk about. Lillian, the movers are finishing up today. Please," I said. I switched tactics. I tried to appeal to the version of him that had bought me a tire gauge for my birthday 3 years ago, the version that had seemed to care. "Frank, look, I know you are hurting. I know losing Mom was hard on you too. But this, selling the house so fast, Mom would not want this. She loved that house." There was a pause on the line. For a second, I thought I had reached him. "Your mother wanted me to be taken care of," he said. His voice was softer, oozing a performative sadness. "She knew how hard I worked on that place. She left me everything because she trusted me." "Lillian, she knew you were transient." Transient. I had moved to Chicago for 5 years to build a career. I had come back the second she got the diagnosis. "I am not transient," I said. "I am her daughter, and I am her husband." He snapped, the softness evaporating. "Look, I have a buyer who pays cash. Do you understand what that means? No inspections, no delays. It is a clean break. It is what is best for everyone, best for you." I said, "I am hanging up now." He said, "Do not come back to the property." "Wait," I cried. "The cedar chest. Just let me have the chest, and the papers inside. I will look through it." He said, "If there is anything personal, I will set it aside." He hung up. I stared at the phone. He was lying. I knew it in my gut. He wasn't going to set anything aside. He was going to sell the chest to an antique dealer and burn the papers. I needed to know how he did it. How did he get the house if Mom had a will? It should have gone to probate, even if she left it all to him. There was a legal process. You couldn't just sell a dead person's house 3 months later without a court order. I dialed the county clerk's office. It took 40 minutes on hold. 40 minutes of watching my gas gauge flicker and listening to tinny saxophone music. Finally, a woman with a tired voice answered, "County clerk, land records." "Hi," I said. "I need to check a deed. For my mother's house." Address. I gave her the address. My address. I could hear her typing. The keys clacked rhythmically. "Okay, I have it," she said. "Current owner is Franklin Miller." My stomach dropped. "Just him, not my mother." The clerk hummed. "Looks like a quitclaim deed was recorded in, let me see, February 12th. Transferred from Ellen Parker to Franklin Miller. February." I whispered. February was 4 months before she died. February was when she was in the worst of the chemo fog. She could barely hold a spoon in February, let alone sign complex legal documents. "Are you sure?" I asked. "It is right here on the screen. Hun, signed and notarized. February 12th. That does not match." I stammered. "She never told me that. She told me the house was in a trust." The clerk sighed. "I can only tell you what is recorded. If you want a copy, you can come down and pay the fee. $2 a page." I hung up. The car felt too small. The air was too hot. She wouldn't have done it. I knew my mother. She was cautious. She was protective of her assets because she had raised me as a single mom for 20 years before she met Frank. She guarded that house like a fortress. The idea that she would just sign it over to him, months before she died. while she was hallucinating from pain medication impossible. I had to go back. I waited until I knew Frank would be at his golf league. It was a Wednesday. He never missed Wednesday golf, even when Mom was dying. He called it his mental health time. I drove to the house. The driveway was empty. The moving truck was gone. I walked up to the front door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. I slid my key into the lock. It went in halfway and stopped. I pushed harder. It wouldn't budge. He had changed the cylinders. Of course he had. I walked around to the back, checking the kitchen door. Locked. I tried the sliding glass door to the patio. Locked. A metal bar was wedged in the track. I pressed my face against the glass, shielding my eyes from the glare. The living room was empty. The carpet still held the dents where the furniture had been. The rectangle where the rug had sat was a brighter shade of beige than the rest of the floor. And under the bay window, nothing. The cedar chest was gone. A wave of panic hit me, so violent I had to lean against the brick wall to keep from sliding down. It wasn't just wood and brass. It was the only place my mother existed anymore. Her handwriting was in there, the smell of her lavender sachets, the letters she wrote to me when I was in college that I had stupidly left there for safekeeping. They were gone. I looked through the window again. The house looked sterile. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a product, a unit of inventory waiting for a cash buyer. I banged my fist against the glass. It made a dull thud. "I cannot get in," I said aloud. I was locked out of my own life. I found the attorney on Google. Tenant rights, free consultation. His office was in a strip mall between a vape shop and a dry cleaner. The carpet in the waiting room was frayed, and the air smelled of stale coffee. His name was Mr. Henderson. He wore a suit that was slightly too large for him, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He listened to me for 10 minutes, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "So," he said, leaning back, "you have no lease. You paid no rent." I was caring for her. I said defensively. That was the agreement. "Family agreements are messy," he said, "in the eyes of the law, without a lease. You are a tenant at will. He has to give you notice." "Yes. But if he claims he is the owner and he wants to sell?" He shrugged. "Can I stop the sale?" I asked. He looked at me over his glasses. "Lillian, if the deed is in his name, he can sell it. You can fight the eviction. Sure, we can drag it out for a month or two, but if he sells the house to a third party, especially a cash buyer, you are fighting an uphill battle against an avalanche." He leaned forward. "Here is the reality. Once that closing happens, once the money changes hands, and the new deed is recorded for the buyer, undoing it becomes 10 times harder. You are not just fighting your stepfather then. You are fighting the new owner, the title company, the banks." I felt the air leave the room. "When is the closing?" he asked. "I do not know." I said. He said, "Soon. Find out." Henderson said, "Because that is your deadline. If you have any claim to that house fraud, a will, a trust, anything you need to file a lis pendens before that sale closes, you need to cloud the title so he cannot sell it." "How do I do that?" "You need evidence," he said. "You cannot just walk into court and say, 'It feels wrong.' You need proof, and you need a retainer." "How much?" $5,000 to start." I looked at my hands. I had $200. I walked out of his office into the blinding afternoon sun. I felt small. I felt like a child trying to stop a tank with a plastic spoon. The courthouse was a fortress of limestone and marble. I walked through the metal detectors, feeling the eyes of the deputies on me. I felt guilty, even though I had done nothing wrong. Poverty and desperation make you feel like a criminal. I went to the probate division. "I need to see if a file has been opened for Ellen Parker." I told the clerk. She typed the name. "Yes," she said. "A file was opened last week." My heart leaped. A file. That meant there was a will, right? "Can I see it?" She printed out a few pages and slid them across the counter. I looked at the top document. It was not a petition for probate of will. It was titled, "Small Estate Affidavit." I read the text, my eyes scanning the legalese. It was a sworn statement signed by Franklin Miller. It stated that Ellen Parker died without a will intestate. It stated that the value of her estate was less than $50,000. It stated that he was the sole heir. I stared at the paper. $50,000. The house alone was worth $400,000, and no will. I looked at the signature. It was Frank's jagged scrawl. He had lied to the court. He had filed a document saying my mother died with nothing, which allowed him to bypass the entire probate process. No notices to creditors, no notices to heirs, no notice to me. "Excuse me," I said to the clerk. "This says the estate is small, but she owned a house." The clerk glanced at the paper. "If the house was transferred before death, or if it was in joint tenancy, it is not part of the probate estate. This affidavit is just for personal property, bank accounts, cars." It clicked. The deed in February. He moved the house out of her name so it wouldn't show up here. Then he filed this affidavit to grab whatever cash was left in her accounts, claiming she had almost nothing. It was a pincer move, a perfectly executed legal maneuver to strip the estate clean before I even dried my eyes. I requested a copy. I paid $10, a significant chunk of my remaining wealth, and walked out holding the evidence of his lie. But knowing it was a lie and proving it were two different things. That night, I sat on the floor of the short-term rental I had booked for 3 days. It was a basement unit with one window that looked out at a brick wall. I was exhausted. My bones hurt. I was hungry, but I didn't want to spend money on food. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my voicemails. I had saved one from 3 weeks before she died. I pressed play. "Lily, it's Mom." The voice was weak, breathless, but it was her. It was the sound of safety. "I was just calling to see if you could pick up some of that ginger tea on your way back. The kind in the yellow box. And I love you. Honey. Okay. Bye." I listened to it again and again. I closed my eyes and let the sound of her voice wash over me. I remembered that day. I had bought the tea. We had sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets. She had looked at the cedar chest that day. I remembered. She had looked at it and said, "I need to show you where the keys are." But she never did. The pain got bad that night, and the ambulance came, and we never went back to the porch. I curled into a ball on the hard floor and sobbed. I cried for the house. I cried for the cedar chest. I cried for the injustice of it, that a man could erase a woman's legacy with a few signatures and a blue polo shirt. I cried until there were no tears left, just a dry, hollow ache in my chest. Then, silence. I sat up and wiped my face. I looked at the small estate affidavit lying on the floor. I looked at the eviction notice I had crumpled in my pocket. Frank thought he had won. He thought he had buried me along with her. He thought I was just a grief-stricken daughter who would fade away because the math was too hard and the law was too complex. He was wrong. I stood up. I walked to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I didn't have $5,000 for a lawyer. I didn't have the keys to the house. I didn't have the cedar chest. But I had the truth. I knew, in the marrow of my bones, that my mother did not leave him everything. She did not sign that deed in February. She did not forget about me. If I couldn't save the house, I would do the one thing I could afford. I would find out what really happened. I grabbed a notebook from my bag and opened it to a fresh page. I wrote down 3 words. Find the notary. The fight started now. The morning sun hit the windshield of my car, but it offered no warmth. I was parked outside a brick building that used to smell like pipe tobacco and old paper. This was where my mother had managed her modest life savings for 20 years. She trusted Mr. Abernathy. She used to say he was the only man who explained compound interest without making her feel small. I walked in, shaking the rain from my coat. The pipe tobacco smell was gone, replaced by the sterile sting of lemon disinfectant. The reception desk was sleek, modern, and manned by a woman who looked like she had been 3D printed that morning. "I am here to see Mr. Abernathy," I said, trying to project a confidence I did not feel. "He retired," she said without looking up. 2 years ago, the floor seemed to tilt slightly. Retired. My mother had never mentioned that. But then, in the last 2 years, our conversations had been dominated by white blood cell counts and chemotherapy schedules. Financial planning had taken a backseat to survival. Who took over his accounts, I asked. My mother was a client. Ellen Parker. She tapped a few keys. Mr. Sterling handles that portfolio now. One moment. Mr. Sterling was not like Mr. Abernathy. He was young, sharp-angled, and wore a watch that cost more than my car. He invited me into an office that was all glass walls and hard surfaces. He did not offer me coffee. I am Lillian Parker, I said, sitting on the edge of the leather chair. Ellen Parker's daughter. I need to know about the status of her accounts, specifically, any transfers made in the last 6 months. Mr. Sterling clasped his hands on the desk. He looked bored. Miss Parker, I cannot discuss client details with you. Privacy laws are very strict. Unless you are the executor or have power of attorney, I am her daughter. I interrupted, and I believe she was defrauded. His expression did not change. That is a serious accusation, but without legal standing. I cannot help you. Please, I said, and I hated the beg in my voice. Just tell me if the house was supposed to be sold. Just tell me if she talked to you about it. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. I can tell you that I reviewed her file when I took over. It was quite simple, mostly annuities. He walked to the door and held it open. I stood up, defeated. As I passed him, he cleared his throat. She did call. He said softly. I froze. When about a year ago, he said, looking at the hallway rather than at me. She called to ask about the fee structure for setting up a trust. She wanted to know if a house could be placed inside one to protect it from external liabilities. External liabilities? Did she set it up, I asked, my heart hammering. We do not handle trusts here, he said, his voice returning to its corporate monotone. We referred her out. I do not know if she followed through. Have a good day. Miss Parker. I walked out into the rain, my mind racing. She had asked about a trust. She was trying to protect the house. External liabilities was financial speak for something specific, or someone specific. I returned to the short-term rental, a damp basement apartment that smelled of mildew and despair. I sat at the small wobbling table and opened my laptop. If she had set up a trust, there had to be a trail. My mother was organized. She kept digital backups of everything because she was terrified of house fires. I logged into her cloud account. I knew her main password. It was the name of her first dog, followed by the year she graduated high school. I had used it to pay her bills when she was too weak to hold a pen. The screen filled with folders, medical, taxes, recipes. I scrolled down. There, at the bottom of the list, was a folder I had never seen before. After I am gone. The breath caught in my throat. It was so like her, practical, morbid, and loving all at once. I double-clicked it. A password prompt appeared. I tried the dog's name. Incorrect password. I tried my birthday. Incorrect password. I tried her anniversary with Frank. Incorrect password. I stared at the screen, my eyes burning. She had locked it. Why would she lock it from me? Unless she was afraid someone else, someone like Frank, would get into it first. There was a password hint button. I clicked it. The text appeared. Sing a song of. I stared at the words. Sing a song of. It was not a riddle. It was a memory. When I was a little girl, terrified of thunderstorms, she would sit on the edge of my bed and stroke my hair and sing the same nursery rhyme. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye. My fingers hovered over the keys. It felt like an invasion of privacy, and yet, it felt like she was in the room, whispering the answer in my ear. I typed sixpence. The folder opened. My heart rate spiked. There were dozens of files. PDFs, scanned images, text documents. I scanned the file names. Life insurance policy, burial wishes, letter to Lillian. I wanted to open the letter. I wanted to read her last words to me so badly that my hands shook, but I could not do it. Not yet. If I opened that letter and she said goodbye, I would fall apart, and I could not afford to fall apart. I needed to be a soldier, not a daughter. I looked for the word house. There was no file named house, but there was a subfolder named title and deeds. I opened it. It was empty. I frowned. Empty. My mother never created empty folders. I checked the date-modified column. The folder had been modified 3 days after she died. Someone had been here. Someone had deleted the files. I sat back, the cold of the basement seeping into my bones. Frank. He must have guessed the password. Or maybe she had written it down somewhere he could find. He had gone in and scrubbed the record, but he had missed something. I went to the trash folder in the cloud. Empty. He had emptied the trash. I went back to the main directory. I sorted by date created. There was a screenshot, taken 2 months before she died. It was just labeled Capture 14. I opened it. It was a blurry photo of a computer screen. It looked like she had taken a picture of a web page with her phone and then uploaded it. The image showed a search result for a title company, Horizon Title Escrow, and there was an email address circled in red in the photo editing tool closing horizontitle.com. Why was she researching title companies 2 months before she died? If Frank sold the house after she died, why was she looking at this then? Unless the sale started before she was gone. Horizon Title. Escrow was located in a strip mall on the other side of town. I drove there with the heater blasting, trying to dry my damp clothes. I walked into the office. It was busy. Phones were ringing, and people were shuffling stacks of paper that represented hundreds of thousands of dollars. I walked up to the front desk. I need to speak to the escrow officer handling the sale of 1402 Maple Drive. I said. The receptionist blinked. Are you the buyer or the seller? I am the daughter of the owner. I said. She frowned. The seller is Franklin Miller. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. I need to speak to the officer. Now. She hesitated, then picked up the phone. A moment later, a woman in a beige cardigan bustled out. She looked harassed and tired. I am Brenda, the escrow officer, she said. How can I help you? I am Lillian Parker, I said. My mother was Ellen Parker. She owned the house you are closing on. Brenda's face changed. It went from professional politeness to guarded wariness. Oh, I need to know what is going on. I said, my stepfather says he sold the house, but my mother never signed those papers. Brenda looked around the lobby, checking if anyone was listening. Come back here, she said quietly. She led me to a cubicle in the back. She did not offer me a seat. Look, Miss Parker, she said, keeping her voice low. We are scheduled to close in 3 days. The title search came back clear. The deed was transferred to Mr. Miller in February. I know that is a lie. I said, she was sick. She would never have done that. Brenda sighed. We verify the paperwork. Miss Parker, we do not verify family dynamics. Everything looks legal on paper. Did you talk to her? I asked. Did you ever speak to Ellen Parker? Brenda shifted her weight. No, the deed was recorded before we opened the file. Mr. Miller brought us the recorded deed. So you just took his word for it. We took the county recorder's word for it. She corrected. That is how this works. I leaned in. There is a hold on this. Right, I am contesting it. There is no hold, Brenda said. But I am telling you, it is fraud. Brenda looked me in the eye. Her expression softened. Just a fraction. Miss Parker, I asked Mr. Miller about you. Standard procedure is to ask about heirs, and he told us you were a non-issue. She said. The words hung in the air. A non-issue. He said you were never on the title. She continued. He said you had been estranged for years and that you had no legal claim. Since your name is not on the deed, legally, you are a stranger to this transaction. I felt the blood drain from my face. Estranged, I had lived there. I had washed her clothes. I had fed her. He lied. I whispered. Brenda looked down at her file. If you want to stop this closing, you need a court order. A judge has to tell me to stop. Otherwise, my fiduciary duty is to the contract, and the contract says we close on Friday. I walked out of the office feeling invisible, a non-issue. That was what I was to the legal system. I was a ghost. I sat in my car and pulled up the county property tax portal on my phone. I needed to see when the change happened. I searched the address. Owner Franklin Miller. Mailing address, P.O. Box 492, West Creek Station. I frowned. We didn't have a P.O. box. We had a mailbox at the end of the driveway. Why would he divert the tax bills to a box? I looked at the eviction notice still crumpled in my passenger seat. I smoothed it out. The law office that had issued it, Holloway Associates, was listed at the bottom. 1200 Main Street, Suite 400. I typed Holloway Associates into the search bar. The website was a generic template. Stock photos of gavels and handshakes. But at the bottom of the contact page, in small print, mailing address, P.O., Box 492, West Creek Station. My skin went cold. The tax bills for the house were going to the same P.O. box as the law firm that was evicting me. He wasn't just using a lawyer. He was funneling the ownership through the lawyer's infrastructure. He was hiding the paper trail. I needed human intel. Documents could be forged. But people saw things. I drove back to the neighborhood. I parked a block away so Frank wouldn't see my car. I walked through the alley to the back fence of our house. Mrs. Higgins was there, just as I hoped. She was 70 years old and spent every waking hour tending to her hydrangeas. She knew everything that happened on Maple Drive. Mrs. Higgins, I whispered over the fence. She jumped, dropping her trowel. Lillian, oh, honey, I heard what happened. I saw the movers. It is a sin, plain and simple. I choked back a sob. Mrs. Higgins, I need to ask you something. Did you see anyone coming to the house in February? Before Mom went into the hospital for the last time? She wiped her hands on her apron and moved closer to the fence. She looked left and right, checking for Frank. I did, she whispered. It was a Saturday. I remember because I was pruning the roses. A car pulled up, a black sedan. A woman got out. She was carrying a big bag, like a briefcase. Did you see who she was? No. But she went inside, and then Mrs. Higgins paused, looking troubled. Then what I heard shouting. Lillian. Shouting. It was Frank. The window was open a crack. He was yelling. He sounded angry, really angry. I heard him say, "Just sign the damn thing. Ellen." My stomach twisted. And your mother? I heard her crying. She sounded so weak. She said, "I need to read it first." And he said, "There is no time." Mrs. Higgins reached over the fence and squeezed my hand. Her skin was dry and papery. It sounded like he was rushing her. Honey, it did not sound right. I told my husband that night. I said, "Frank is bullying that poor woman." Did the woman with the briefcase do anything? She just stood there on the porch for a minute, then went in. She was only there for 20 minutes. When she left, Frank came out and smoked a cigarette. He looked like he had just run a race. Shaky. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "You have no idea how much that helps." She squeezed my hand harder. "You get him. Lillian, you get that son of a bitch." I had $150 left. I found a private investigator on Craigslist. His ad said, "Information retrieval." Fast, discreet. We met at a diner. He was a small man with a stained tie and eyes that moved too fast. He didn't give me a name, just asked for the cash up front. I put 3 $50 bills on the table. It was my food money for the next 2 weeks. "I need everything you can find on Franklin Miller," I said. "And I need to know about a notary." I gave him the name of the notary from the deed I had seen at the clerk's office. Sarah Jenkins. He took the money. "Give me 6 hours." I waited in the library, pacing between the stacks. 6 hours felt like 6 years. When my phone buzzed, it was an email from an anonymous address. Attached was a PDF. I opened it. Subject Franklin Miller/Sarah Jenkins. Franklin Miller, Civil Judgments, 2018, $15,000. Credit card default, 2020 $42,000. Failed business venture solar panel scam, 2022 $12,000. Gambling debt adjudicated. He was broke. He had been broke for years. He had been drowning in debt while living in my mother's house, eating her food, and pretending to be the doting husband. The house wasn't just an inheritance to him. It was a lifeline. But the second part of the report was the smoking gun. Sarah Jenkins, notary. Public Commission Number 884291, associated with Halloway Associates. Notary Record Jenkins has notarized over 200 documents for Halloway Associates in the last 2 years. Flagged for review by State Board in 2021 for irregularities in presence, but case dismissed. She was a rubber stamp. She was the notary the law firm used when they needed a signature witness, whether the witness was actually there or not. The piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Frank didn't just bully my mother into signing. He brought in a professional to make it look legal. I went back to the email search. I needed to find where she put the physical proof. If Frank had scrubbed the house, where would she hide the real papers I searched for storage? Nothing. I searched for box. Nothing. I closed my eyes and thought about the lullaby again. Sing a song of sixpence. I typed rye. A single email popped up. It was a receipt from U-Store-It Self-Storage. Unit 404. Renter Ellen Parker. Date January 15th. She had rented a storage unit 1 month before the deed transfer. I looked at the address. It was on the outskirts of town, near the industrial park. I drove there. It was dusk. The facility was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. I went to the office. The manager was a guy with a grease-stained shirt eating a sandwich. "I am here to pay the bill for Unit 404, I said. "I am Ellen Parker's daughter." He looked at his computer. "You are just in time. It was set for auction tomorrow, 3 months past due." My heart stopped. Tomorrow. If I had waited 1 more day, everything inside would have been sold to strangers on a reality TV show. I handed him my debit card. It was declined. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "Try it again. Please." "Declined. I have cash," I said. Digging into my purse, I had $20 left in change and small bills. "The bill is $80, he said. I looked at him. "Please. My mother died. Whatever is in that unit is all I have left of her." He looked at the sandwich, then at me. He sighed. "Give me the 20, he said. "I will mark it as a partial payment. That buys you 24 hours to get your stuff out." I handed him the crumpled bills. "Thank you." He gave me the gate code. I drove to Unit 404. It was an outdoor unit with a roll-up orange door. There was a cheap padlock on it. I didn't have the key. I went back to the car and grabbed the tire iron. I didn't care about the law anymore. This was my mother's unit. I jammed the tire iron into the shackle of the lock and twisted. I put all my weight into it, all my anger, all my grief. The metal groaned. I jumped on the tire iron. Snap. The lock broke. I rolled up the door. The unit was small, 5 by 5. It was mostly empty. There was a stack of old winter coats, a broken lamp, and in the center, sitting on a plastic crate, was a cardboard box labeled Lillian. I fell to my knees. I opened the box. Inside were file folders, real estate, will drafts, medical journals, and on top of the files lay a small, black digital recorder, the kind doctors use for dictation. I picked it up. My thumb hovered over the play button. The air in the unit was still and cold. I pressed play. There was a hiss of static. Then, my mother's voice. It was weak, breathy, the voice of a woman whose lungs were filling with fluid. "I do not know what I signed," she whispered. "Frank brought a woman here today. He said it was for the insurance. He was so angry. He kept yelling that I owed him." A pause. The sound of her ragged breathing. "I am scared. Lillian, I think he is trying to take the house. I tried to hide the papers. But I'm so tired." Another pause. "If anything happens, call the name on the card. I went to see him last year. He has the real will. Frank does not know about him." The recording ended. I dug through the box. At the bottom, taped to the inside of a folder, was a business card. Marcus Thorne, estate attorney, private client services. I had never heard the name. Marcus Thorne's office was not in a strip mall. It was in a restored Victorian house in the historic district. I went there the next morning, wearing the only clean shirt I had left. Mr. Thorne was an older man with silver hair and kind eyes. He listened to the recording. He listened to my story about the eviction, the notary, the non-issue comment. When I finished, He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. I remember your mother well. He said, she was a very sharp woman, even when she was sick. She came to me because she was worried about exactly this scenario. She feared Mr. Miller was becoming acquisitive. Did she make a will, I asked? She did more than that. Lillian. She created a revocable living trust. She placed the house into the trust. I stared at him. Then why does Frank have a deed? Because, Mr. Thorne said, putting his glasses back on. A trust only controls assets that are titled in the name of the trust. We drafted the deed to transfer the house into the trust. She signed it in my office a year ago. So the house is safe. He sighed. Here's the problem. She took the deed with her. She wanted to record it herself to save the filing fee. If she never recorded it, and if Frank coerced her into signing a new deed to him before the trust deed was recorded, then the new deed wins, I asked. Feeling sick, it is a race to the courthouse. Lillian, the last valid signature recorded usually stands, unless we can prove fraud. I have the recording, I said. I have Mrs. Higgins' Mr. Thorne nodded. That is evidence, but Frank has a recorded deed and a notary seal. If we challenge this, it will not be a simple hearing. It will be a war. He will attack your character. He will attack your mother's mental state. He will spend every dime of the equity in that house fighting you. I do not care about the money. I said, it is not just money, he warned. If we file this suit, we are accusing a law firm and a notary of criminal conspiracy. They will come after you. They will try to bury you in motions and fees until you quit. He looked at the clock, and the closing is in 2 days. If that house sells to a third party, the trust becomes almost irrelevant. You cannot recover the property from a good faith buyer easily. We have to stop the sale. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a file. I have the original trust documents here, signed and witnessed. If we can find the deed she signed, the one transferring the house to the trust, we win. Do you have it? I shook my head. It was not in the box. Then we have to find it, he said. Or we have to prove the deed Frank has is a forgery. He leaned forward. Are you ready for this? Lillian. Once I file this appearance, there is no going back. You will be declaring war on your stepfather. I thought about the eviction notice. I thought about the cedar chest rolling away. I thought about my mother's voice on that recorder, whispering that she was scared. I am not imagining it. I said, he really did this. No, Mr. Thorne said, you are not imagining it. I stood up. File it. I said, let's go to war. Mr. Thorne laid the documents on his mahogany conference table. The wood was dark and glossy, reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead like a calm sea. But the papers sitting on top of it were a storm. This is the battlefield. Lillian, he said, his voice grave. I looked at the stack. On the left was the binder containing my mother's revocable living trust. On the right was a single sheet of paper, a certified copy from the county recorder's office that I had paid for that morning. Explain it to me. I said, I need to understand the mechanics of how he stole it. Mr. Thorne uncapped a pen. Your mother created a trust, he began, tapping the binder. Think of the trust as a bucket. She created this bucket to hold her assets, the house, her savings, her life insurance. The goal of the bucket is to bypass probate. If the assets are in the bucket when she dies, the court does not get involved. The bucket has instructions on who gets what. In this case, the instructions say, the house goes to you. He paused, looking at me over the rim of his glasses. But a trust is useless if the bucket is empty, he said, and the house I asked. Though I already knew the answer, the house was never put in the bucket, he said. We drafted the deed to transfer it. She signed it here, in this office, but she took the physical document with her. She wanted to record it herself. I closed my eyes. I could hear her voice. I will save the $50. Marcus, I am going to the county building anyway. She never recorded it. Mr. Thorne said softly. And because that deed was never recorded, the house remained in her name as an individual. He slid the paper on the right toward me. Until February 12th, he said. I looked at the document. It was a quitclaim deed. On February 12th, While your mother was heavily medicated and dependent on oxygen, a new deed was recorded. Thorne said, "This deed transfers the property from Ellen Parker to Ellen Parker and Franklin Miller as joint tenants with rights of survivorship." He circled the phrase, "rights of survivorship," with his pen. The ink bled slightly into the paper. "This is the magic trick," he said. "In the eyes of the law, a joint tenancy with rights of survivorship means that the moment one owner dies, their interest vanishes and is instantly absorbed by the surviving owner. It happens automatically. It does not go through probate. It does not go through the will. It does not go through the trust. So the will does not matter," I asked, my voice trembling. "The will is a pour-over will," Thorne explained. "It is designed to catch anything left out of the trust and pour it in. But joint tenancy trumps the will, the moment she took her last breath. If this deed is valid, Frank became the sole 100% owner of that house. He did not inherit it. He simply absorbed it." I stared at the paper. It was a legal weapon. It was a way to bypass every wish she had ever written down. "Is it valid?" I asked. Thorne pulled out a magnifying glass. He was old-fashioned that way, but I appreciated the drama of it. He placed the deed next to the original trust document my mother had signed in his office a year prior. "Look at the signature," he said. I leaned in. My mother's signature was distinctive. She had been a schoolteacher for 30 years. She had perfect cursive. Her E in Ellen always started with a high, confident loop. Her P in Parker had a sharp, defined tail. I looked at the signature on the February deed. It said Ellen Parker. It was shaky, which made sense given her illness. But it wasn't just the shakiness. The E was flat. It started from the bottom, not the top, and the P didn't have a tail. It just trailed off into a smudge. I felt a physical sickness rise in my stomach. I knew my mother's hands better than my own. I had held them while she slept. I had watched her write grocery lists until she lost the strength to hold a pen. "That is not her," I whispered. "It looks like a simulation," Thorne said. "It looks like someone who practiced her signature but did not understand the muscle memory behind it. They got the shape roughly right, but the stroke order is wrong." He pointed to the notary stamp. "Sarah Jenkins. This is the key. Lillian. A deed must be notarized to be recorded. The notary is the gatekeeper. She is swearing under penalty of perjury that she witnessed Ellen Parker sign this document voluntarily. She was not there." I said, "Mrs. Higgins saw a woman, but she said Frank was yelling. She said Mom was crying. If we can prove the notary lied," Thorne said, "the deed is void. If the deed is void, the house falls back into the estate. The pour-over will grabs it, puts it in the trust, and the house is yours. But," he added, his voice hardening, "we have a problem. The closing." I said, "Friday." He said, 2 days. If Frank sells that house to a bona fide purchaser, someone who pays value and does not know about the fraud, the law tends to protect the buyer. We can sue Frank for the money later. But the house will be gone." He looked at me. "I am going to order a certified copy of the notary's journal. Every notary must keep a log. If she recorded the signature, she had to log the time and date. We will compare that to your mother's medical records. But that takes time." "We do not have time," I said. "No," Thorne agreed. "We do not." I drove straight to the house. I did not have a plan. I did not have a weapon. I had a rage that felt cold and precise, like a surgical instrument. Frank's truck was in the driveway. The garage door was open. He was hauling things out my childhood. Packed into black trash bags, I parked my car at the curb, blocking the driveway. I got out and slammed the door. Frank looked up. He was wearing work gloves and that same blue polo shirt. He looked annoyed, not guilty. That was the thing about Frank. He had convinced himself he was the victim. "You are trespassing." "Lillian," he called out, hoisting a bag over his shoulder. I walked up the driveway, stopping 10 feet from him. I went to the clerk's office. "Frank." He paused. He threw the bag into the bed of the truck. It landed with a heavy thud. "Good for you," he said. "I hope you found it educational." I saw the deed. I said, "February 12th, Joint tenancy. He wiped his forehead with the back of his glove. Ellen wanted me to have the house. She knew you could not afford the upkeep. She was looking out for you. Stop it, I said. My voice was calm, which scared him more than screaming would have. I saw the signature. Frank. The E is wrong. You practiced it, but you forgot how she looped the top. His face turned a mottled red. You are crazy, he spat. She signed it right at that kitchen table. Was the notary there, I asked. Sarah Jenkins. Was she at the table? Frank took a step toward me. He was a big man, and he used his size to intimidate. He had done it for years, looming over my mother, filling the room with his unspoken potential for violence. Of course she was there, he growled. Then why does Mrs. Higgins say she heard you yelling at Mom to sign it? Why does she say she heard Mom crying? He stopped. His eyes darted to the neighbor's house, then back to me. Mrs. Higgins is a senile old bat, he said. And you are disgusting. Your mother is barely cold, and you are here picking over her bones like a vulture. I am not the one selling her house for cash 3 months later. I said, I am selling it to pay her debts, he shouted. He was losing control now. The rehearsed calm was cracking. Do you have any idea what she cost me? The medical bills, the funeral. She left me with nothing but bills. Lillian, I am cleaning up her mess. He was weaponizing the grief. He was trying to make me feel small, to make me feel like the irresponsible child he had always claimed I was. She had insurance, I said. She had savings. She had nothing, he screamed. He pulled off his glove and threw it on the ground. You think you know everything? You were in Chicago. You were not here when she was throwing up all night. You were not here when the creditors were calling. I earned this house. I stood my ground. You forged her name, I said, and I'm going to prove it. Get off my property, he hissed, or I will call the police. Call them, I said. I would love to show them the trust documents. He flinched. It was small, but I saw it. The word trust hit him. He didn't know I had found Thorne. He thought he had scrubbed the house clean. I turned and walked back to my car. My legs were shaking, but I didn't let him see. I had rattled him. He was scared, and a scared man makes mistakes. I needed to verify his story about the debts. She left me with nothing but bills. I went to the bank, not her local branch, but the main downtown office where the mortgage records were held. I had the small estate affidavit he had filed, which, ironically, gave me just enough legal cover to ask questions about the liabilities of the estate. Even if he claimed I wasn't an heir, I sat with a loan officer. I showed her my ID and the death certificate. I need to know if there are any liens on 1402 Maple Drive. I said. She tapped on her keyboard. Yes, she said. There is a first mortgage, almost paid off, and there is a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. When was it opened, I asked. January, she said. January. 1 month before the deed transfer. And how much is drawn on it? She squinted at the screen. It is maxed out. $150,000. My breath caught. $150,000. Where did that money go? I cannot see the transaction details without a court order. She said, but the statements let me see. The statements are being mailed to a P.O. Box 492, I guessed. She looked surprised. Yes, that is correct. I walked out of the bank feeling lightheaded. He hadn't just stolen the house. He had strip-mined it. He had taken out a loan against the equity while she was dying, funneled the cash to his secret P.O. box, and now he was selling the house to pay off the loan and pocket the difference. He was cashing out twice. My phone rang as I was driving back to the rental. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Ms. Parker. This is Greg Salisbury. I am the agent representing the buyer for the Maple Drive property. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. How did you get my number, I asked. Your stepfather gave it to me. He said, Look, Lillian. Can I call you Lillian? We have a bit of a situation. We are set to close on Friday, but I understand there is some friction. There is no friction. I said, there is fraud. Greg laughed. A dismissive little chuckle. Let's not use heavy words. Look, Frank tells me you are going through a hard time. Moving is expensive. We get that. My buyer. They are very compassionate people. They want this to go smoothly for everyone. What are you saying I am saying? They authorized me to offer you a relocation fee to help you get settled. How much I asked? I needed to know the price of my silence. $10,000, he said. Cash. Available immediately. All you need to do is sign a quitclaim deed. Just to tidy up the paperwork. We know you do not have a claim, strictly speaking, but it would help the title company feel better. I gripped the steering wheel. $10,000. To me, right now, that was a fortune. It was rent for a year. It was food. It was safety. But it was also a trap. If I signed a quitclaim, I was validating Frank's ownership. I was waiving my rights. Why would you pay $10,000 if I have no claim I asked? Just to be nice, Greg said. Just to keep things smooth. You are betting I am desperate. I said, you are betting I will take the quick money and disappear. Lillian, be reasonable. The closing is happening regardless. This is free money. I am not signing anything. I said, and tell your buyer they are purchasing a lawsuit. I hung up. My hands were sweating. They were scared. The title company must have spooked them. They knew the joint tenancy deed was shaky. They wanted me to sign it away to bulletproof the deal. I called Mr. Thorne. They offered me $10,000. I said, that means they are nervous. Thorne said, I filed the notice of interest with the title company an hour ago. Did they stop the closing? No, he said. His voice was tired. I just got the email from their legal department. They are taking the position that your claim is unsubstantiated. They said unless we bring a court order and injunction signed by a judge by Friday morning. They are proceeding. Friday morning. That was 36 hours away. Can we get an injunction, I asked? Thorne hesitated. I can file for an emergency hearing. But the probate judges are backed up. Getting a hearing within 24 hours. It is a long shot. Lillian, we are at the mercy of the docket. File it. I said, what else can we do? I will file it, he said. But you need to prepare yourself. If we do not get a judge's signature by 9 a.m. Friday, that house is sold. I went back to the email from the private investigator. I had paid him for a deep dive on the buyer. The entity buying the house was called Blue Horizon Holdings, LLC. The PI's report was comprehensive. Blue Horizon Holdings was not a nice family looking for a starter home. It was a shell company registered in Delaware. The PI had traced the registered agent to a firm in the city that specialized in distressed asset acquisition. He had included a list of their last 20 purchases. Every single one was a foreclosure, a tax lien sale, or a probate flip. They were vultures. They circled families in crisis divorces, deaths, bankruptcies, and swooped in with cash offers that were 60 cents on the dollar. They didn't care about the house. They cared about the margin. But there was a note at the bottom of the PI's report. Note Blue Horizon shares a business address with Premier Property Consulting. I froze. Premier Property Consulting. I scrambled for the eviction notice. The law firm, Halloway Associates, was in Suite 400. I searched Premier Property Consulting. Address 1200 Main Street, Suite 400. They were in the same suite. The law firm evicting me, the notary who forged the signature, and the buyer paying cash for the house. They were all connected. This wasn't just Frank being greedy. This was an ecosystem. Frank was just the mark. Or maybe he was the accomplice. They had found him a desperate man with gambling debts and groomed him. Transfer the house to yourself. Take out the HELOC. We will buy it from you for cash, and we will handle the legal side. They were laundering the house through him. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was organized. These people did this for a living, and I was just one woman with a distinct lack of resources standing in front of a bulldozer. I needed to feel close to her. I needed to remember why I was fighting, because the fear was starting to taste like bile in my throat. I went to the storage unit. The lock I had broken was replaced by a new one I had bought at the gas station. I opened the box of files again. I sat on the cold concrete floor under the buzzing fluorescent light. I went through the medical folder. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for a date. a confirmation of when she was lucid and when she wasn't. I found a discharge summary from January. Patient is oriented ×3. I found a hospice admission form from March. Patient is confused, lethargic. I flipped a page, and a white envelope slid out from between two insurance statements. It was sealed. On the front, in shaky block letters, it said, Lillian. My heart stopped. I hadn't seen this before. It must have been stuck to the back of the other paper. I picked it up. The paper felt cheap, not the heavy stationery she usually used. I tore it open. There was a single sheet of notebook paper inside. My dearest Lillian, I know you are worried about the house. Please do not fight Frank on this. I have decided it is best if he handles the estate. He has promised to take care of you. I am signing the papers to make things easier. Please, let it go. Move on with your life. I love you. Mom. I stared at the letter, the handwriting. It was hers, but it was wrong. It was the same as the deed. The loops were flat. The pressure was uneven. But not in the way a sick person writes. It was uneven in the way a slow hand writes. I looked at the date at the top, April 15th. I stopped breathing. My mother died on April 10th. She had been dead for 5 days when this letter was dated. I looked at the envelope. There was no postmark. It had never been mailed. Someone had created this. Frank. He had written it, trying to forge a final letter to gaslight me, to make me back down if I ever started asking questions. Please do not fight Frank. It was so clumsy, so desperate. But why was it here? Then I realized he must have planted it. Not in the storage unit, he couldn't get in there. He must have planted it in the file box at the house before I took it. He slipped it into the medical file, hoping I would find it later, after the funeral, and think it was a message from beyond the grave telling me to surrender. He messed up the date. He was so stressed, so rushed, that he wrote the date he wrote the letter. Not the date she was supposed to have written it. He wrote it 5 days after she died, probably in a panic when I started asking about the will. I held the letter in my hand. It wasn't a message of love. It was a confession. He had tried to control me from the grave. He had tried to use her voice to silence me. I stood up. The sadness evaporated. The fear evaporated. All that was left was the survival math. He had forged the deed. He had forged the letter. He had conspired with a predatory company to steal the only thing my mother had left to give me. They wanted me to bring a court order. They wanted me to play by the rules. I looked at the date on the letter again. April 15th. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. I wasn't just going to stop the closing. I was going to burn their entire operation to the ground. I picked up my phone and called Thorne. "Did you get the hearing?" I asked. "No," he said, sounding defeated. "The judge is out until Monday. The clerk wouldn't squeeze us in. Lillian, I am sorry. We cannot stop the closing legally." "I know." I said, "So what do we do?" He asked. "We can file a lawsuit next week. But the title will be gone. We do the only thing left." I said, "What is that?" "We show up." I said, "Lillian, you cannot just disrupt a closing. It is a private business transaction. It is a crime scene," I corrected, "and I'm going to be the witness." I hung up before he could tell me no. I looked at the storage unit one last time. I packed the files, the recorder, and the fake letter into my bag. Frank thought he was closing a deal on Friday. He thought he was walking away with a check and a clean slate. He had no idea that I was coming to the table, and I was bringing the ghosts with me. The phone call from Marcus Thorne came at 2 p.m. While I was standing on the concrete floor of the logistics center, scanning barcodes on boxes of toaster ovens, the scanner beeped a monotonous rhythm that had become the soundtrack of my life. But when I saw his name on the screen, the sound faded into a dull roar. I stepped away from the line, ignoring the glare of the shift supervisor. "Did we get it?" I asked. "Did the judge sign the injunction, Lillian?" Thorne said, his voice heavy with the specific fatigue of a lawyer who knows the system is broken. "We got a hearing date. When next Tuesday?" My stomach dropped. Tuesday. Tuesday was 4 days away. The closing was tomorrow. Tuesday is too late, I said, gripping the phone tight enough to whiten my knuckles. The house will be sold by then. Frank will have the cash. The LLC will have the title. I know, Thorne said. I tried to explain the urgency to the clerk. I told them this involves potential fraud and the dissipation of assets, but the probate docket is overflowing. The judge simply does not have an opening until Tuesday morning. So that is it, I asked. We just let them win because the calendar is full. We can file a lis pendens immediately after the hearing. Thorne said, we can try to claw the house back, but once a bona fide purchaser holds the title, it becomes 10 times harder. I finished for him, quoting the tenant lawyer I had met days ago. I am sorry, Lillian, without that injunction, I cannot force the title company to stop. They are proceeding with the closing tomorrow at 10 in the morning. I hung up. The warehouse was loud forklifts whining, conveyor belts humming, people shouting over the noise, but I stood in a bubble of silence. The legal system had shrugged. It had looked at a forged deed and a stolen inheritance and said, wait your turn. But I could not wait. I looked at the boxes moving past me on the belt. They were just objects, property. But my mother's house wasn't just property. It was the crime scene. And if I let them scrub it clean tomorrow, I would never prove what they did to her. I walked back to the line and picked up my scanner. I didn't quit. I couldn't afford to quit. I needed the health insurance, and I needed the paycheck to pay Thorne. But as I worked, the grief that had been drowning me for weeks began to harden. It compressed, fueled by the heat of my rage, until it turned into something sharp and useful. I wasn't going to wait for Tuesday. If the court wouldn't stop the transaction, I would have to do it myself. That evening, I went to Thorne's office. I looked like a wreck. My hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and there were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. I was sleeping in 4-hour chunks, waking up in the rental basement with my heart hammering, terrified I had missed a deadline. Thorne handed me a document. It was a photocopy of a page from a logbook. This came in an hour ago. He said, the notary's journal. I looked at it. It was a grid of handwritten entries. Date, time, type of document, signer's name, signer's signature. I ran my finger down the list to February 12th. There it was. 10:30 a.m. Quitclaim deed. Ellen Parker. I stared at the time. 10:30 in the morning. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the thick file of medical records I had salvaged from the storage unit. My mother kept everything. Every explanation of benefits, every appointment reminder, every discharge summary. I flipped through the pages until I found February 12th. Here, I said, slamming the paper onto the mahogany table. Look at this. Thorne leaned in. It was an infusion log from the cancer center. Patient Ellen Parker. Check-in time. 9:15 a.m. Infusion. Start 9:45 a.m. Infusion end 12:30 p.m. I looked at Thorne. She was hooked up to an IV bag of chemotherapy at 10:30 in the morning. I said, she was 5 miles away from the house. Thorne took off his glasses. He looked from the journal to the medical record. This is it, he said softly. This is the smoking gun. She physically could not have signed that deed at the kitchen table at 10:30. The notary lied. And if the notary lied, I said, the deed is void. Thorne nodded. It is void ab initio. From the beginning, it is a fraudulent instrument. He stood up and began pacing the office. This changes things. This is not just a civil dispute anymore. This is a felony. Perjury. Forgery. If we present this to a judge? On Tuesday. I reminded him. He stopped pacing. Right. Tuesday. We cannot wait for the judge. I said, I am going to the closing. Lillian. Thorne warned. I am going. I repeated. I am going to walk into that room, and I'm going to put this infusion log on the table, and I am going to ask that notary to explain how my mother was in 2 places at once. Thorne looked at me. He saw the resolve in my face. He saw that I was past the point of being managed. If you go, he said slowly, you cannot just yell. You need to be precise. You need to be lethal. Then help me. I said, build me a weapon. I spent the rest of the night digging. The anger gave me a strange, vibrating energy. I didn't need sleep. I needed answers. I went back to the connection between the law firm and the buyer. Holloway Associates and Premier Property Consulting. They shared a suite, but I needed more. I needed to know who was pulling the strings. I went to the Secretary of State's business search website. I looked up Premier Property Consulting. Manager J. Holloway, the lawyer, owned the consulting firm. That wasn't illegal, strictly speaking, but it was a conflict of interest so big you could drive a truck through it. He was evicting me as a lawyer, to clear the house for a company he owned, to sell it to an LLC that used his address. I looked up the other LLCs registered to that suite. There were dozens. Blue Horizon, Rapid Real Estate, Capital Flow 1, 2, and 3. I clicked on the agent tab for each one. They all listed the same registered agent name, Karen S. Miller. Miller. My heart stopped. Frank's last name was Miller. Was it a coincidence Miller was a common name? I searched for Karen S. Miller on social media. I found a LinkedIn profile. Office manager at Holloway Associates. I scrolled through her photos. There was one from a company Christmas party. She was standing next to a man in a suit Holloway, presumably, but in the background, holding a plastic cup of wine, was Frank. I zoomed in. It was definitely Frank. He looked uncomfortable, out of place in his flannel shirt, but he was there. Karen Miller. Was she his sister? His cousin? I went back to the private investigator's report on Frank. I looked at the section on relatives. Ex-wife Karen Sue Miller. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered. They weren't divorced. Or if they were still working together. Frank hadn't just stumbled into this law firm. His ex-wife ran the office. She was the gatekeeper. She was the one who probably set this whole thing up. The receptionist. The name on the filings. It was a family business, and my mother was just the raw material they were processing. I felt a wave of nausea. My mother had welcomed Frank into her life. She had cooked for him, washed his clothes, trusted him with her heart, and all the while, he had a partner waiting in the wings, sketching out the architecture of her ruin. The next morning, I called Sarah, not the notary, my friend Sarah from the warehouse. I need your help. I said, I need to build a timeline. She came over to the damp basement apartment on her lunch break. We sat on the floor with a calendar and a stack of bank statements. I need to find the blackout period. I told her, "What is a blackout period?" Sarah asked, chewing on a sandwich. The time when he isolated her. I said, the time when he stopped letting people visit. We went through the calendar. Here, Sarah said, pointing to late January. You texted me here saying you couldn't get hold of her for 3 days. I checked the phone logs. January 25th through February 10th. 2 weeks. I looked at the bank statements. During those 2 weeks, there were 3 withdrawals from the ATM near the casino, $200 each. Frank was gambling. He was spiraling. And then, on February 12th, the day the deed was signed, the withdrawals stopped. Why? Because he knew money was coming. I looked at the neighbor's statement again. Mrs. Higgins said she saw the woman with the briefcase on a Saturday. February 12th was a Tuesday. The notary journal said Tuesday. Mrs. Higgins saw a woman on Saturday. They didn't just forge the signature. They forged the date. They probably brought the notary over on Saturday. February 9th, when I was at work. They tried to get Mom to sign. Mrs. Higgins heard yelling. Mom refused. She was crying. So the notary left. Then, on Tuesday the 12th, while Mom was at the infusion center hooked up to an IV, Frank and his ex-wife Karen probably sat in that office and forged the deed. Sarah Jenkins, the notary, stamped it, backdating it, or simply lying about the presence of the signer. They needed the date to be the 12th because... Why I looked at the calendar. February 14th. Valentine's Day was when Mom was admitted to the hospital for a week. She was incapacitated. If the deed was dated then, it would be too suspicious. They had to pick a good day. But they picked the one day she had a verifiable medical alibi. They got sloppy. I needed to see the escrow officer again. I needed to smell the fear. I took a long lunch break from work. I changed into a blazer in the car, my lawyer costume, I called it. I walked into Horizon Title. Brenda looked up. When she saw me, her face tightened. She didn't look annoyed this time. She looked frightened. "Miss Parker," she said, standing up. "I told you. I cannot speak with you. I just have one question." "Brenda," I said, leaning on the high counter, "are you verifying the identity of the seller tomorrow?" She blinked. "Excuse me, Frank Miller," I said, "and the other signer. Are you verifying them, Mr. Miller is the only seller," she said automatically. "Is he?" I asked. "Or is there a silent partner?" Her eyes darted to the phone. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I leaned closer. "You know this is fraud. Brenda, I can see it in your face. You saw the title report. You saw the date. You know my mother was dying. I am just the escrow officer," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I follow the instructions. Who gave you the instructions?" I asked. "Was it Holloway? Was it Karen Miller?" Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. "Please leave," she said, "or I will call security." I backed away. I didn't need her to answer. The name Karen Miller had hit her like a slap. She knew. She was part of it, or she was being pressured by them. As I walked to the door, a man in a suit stepped out of the back office. He was holding a file. He looked at me, then at Brenda. "Is this the daughter?" he asked. Brenda nodded. The man walked up to me. He held out an envelope. "Miss Parker," he said. His voice was smooth, baritone, practiced. "I am Arthur Dent, attorney for the buyer. This is for you." I took the envelope. "It is a cease and desist," he said pleasantly, "and a notice of intent to sue for tortious interference with a business contract. If you disrupt the closing tomorrow, or if you continue to harass my client's agents, we will seek damages." "Damages?" I asked. "You are buying a stolen house. We are buying a property with clear title," he said. "Any issues between you and your stepfather are a family matter. If you bring that drama into our transaction, we will hold you financially liable for any delay." He smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Go home, Miss Parker. Mourn your mother. Let the professionals handle the business." I looked at him. I looked at the expensive cut of his suit. I looked at the way he dismissed me as a nuisance, a fly to be swatted away. I took the envelope. I didn't open it. "See you tomorrow," I said. I went back to Thorne's office. He read the letter from Arthur Dent. He tossed it on the desk. "It is a scare tactic," he said. "Tortious interference requires proof that you acted with malice and without justification. You have justification. You have a claim of right. But it worked." I said, "I am scared." "Good," Thorne said. "Being scared makes you sharp." He opened a folder. "Here's the packet," he said. He laid out the documents like weapons in an armory. "First, the affidavit of forgery. This is your sworn statement that the signature is fake. Second, the infusion log, certified by the hospital records custodian. This proves the alibi. Third, the notary journal copy. This proves the conflict. Fourth, a draft. Lis pendens. This is the document we will file with the court on Tuesday. Showing it to them now is a warning shot. It tells them that even if they close, the title will be clouded next week. And finally," Thorne said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. "What is this?" I asked. "This is a demand for identity verification," he said. "It is a formal request for the title company to re-verify the identity of the signer using a secondary form of ID, and to fingerprint the seller at the table. Fingerprint. It is standard in high-risk transactions," Thorne said. "If Frank is innocent, he won't mind. If he is guilty, he will panic." I said. Thorne nodded. "I will be there with you," Thorne said. "I cannot stop the closing, but I can stand next to you while you drop these bombs." "Thank you," I said. He looked at me. He looked worried. "Lillian, these people, the way this is structured, the shell companies, the ex-wife, this is not amateur hour. They will not like being cornered." I touched the pocket where I kept the fake letter from my mother. "I do not like being an orphan." I said, "I guess we are all going to be unhappy." I went back to the rental. I packed my bag for the next day. I chose my clothes carefully. I didn't want to look like the grieving, hysterical daughter. I didn't want to look like the warehouse worker. I chose a black dress I had worn to a job interview in Chicago years ago. It was severe, tailored. I polished my boots. I pulled my hair back so tight it pulled at my temples. I wanted to look like the nemesis. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. The silence of the basement was heavy. My phone buzzed. I picked it up. It was a text message. The number was blocked. I opened it. "Don't go tomorrow. Your mom wouldn't want this." I stared at the screen. The white text on the gray background seemed to glow. Your mom wouldn't want this. It wasn't a threat of violence. It wasn't, "We will hurt you." It was intimate. It was psychological. It was designed to hook into my guilt, into the soft part of me that wondered if I was disrespecting her memory by fighting. Who sent it, Frank Karen? It felt like Frank. It sounded like the way he used to talk to me at dinner. Your mom wouldn't want you to argue. Lillian. But the fact that they sent it meant one thing. They knew I was coming. They knew I hadn't taken the $10,000. They knew the cease and desist hadn't worked. They were watching me. Maybe they were watching the house right now. I stood up and walked to the window. All I could see was the brick wall of the window well. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of fear. I was alone. I was one woman against a network of lawyers, LLCs, and desperate relatives. But then I thought about the infusion log. I thought about my mother, sitting in that chair for 3 hours, poison dripping into her veins, while Frank and Karen were somewhere else, signing her name away. I thought about the non-issue comment. I typed a reply to the blocked number. I didn't know if they would get it, but I needed to send it. She isn't the one who needs to be worried. I turned off the phone. I lay down on the bed, fully clothed. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I visualized the closing table. I visualized the faces. I visualized the moment I would lay the papers down. I breathed in, survival. I breathed out, math, tomorrow. The equation would finally balance. The parking lot of Horizon Title Escrow was a vast gray expanse of asphalt that radiated heat even at 9 in the morning. I sat in my car, the air conditioning blasting against my face, watching the entrance like a sniper. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard that my fingers had turned white. A stark contrast to the black fabric of my dress. I had chosen the dress carefully. It was not a funeral dress, and it was not a party dress. It was a sheath of black wool that buttoned to the throat, severe, armored, and entirely devoid of softness. I had pulled my hair back into a bun so tight it pulled the skin at my temples. And I wore no makeup. I wanted to look like a blade. Beside me, in the passenger seat, sat the closing packet Marcus Thorne had assembled. It was a thick manila envelope, but to me, it looked like a bomb. Inside were the infusion logs, the notary journal copies, the trust documents, and the draft of the lawsuit we would file on Tuesday if this failed. I checked the time on the dashboard, 9:15. A silver Lexus pulled into the lot. I watched as my stepfather, Frank, stepped out. He was not wearing the blue polo shirt today. He was wearing a suit, an ill-fitting, shiny gray suit that I recognized from my mother's cousin's wedding 3 years ago. He looked like he was going to church or court, but he didn't look sad. He was joined a moment later by 2 other men. One was short and balding Greg Salisbury, the buyer's agent who had tried to bribe me with $10,000. The other was tall, wearing a navy suit that cost more than my annual salary. That had to be Arthur Dent, the lawyer who had threatened to sue me for harassment. Frank laughed. It was a big, open-mouthed laugh, and he slapped Greg on the back. It was the laugh of a man who had already spent the money. He was not grieving. He was not reluctantly selling his late wife's estate to pay debts. He was celebrating the payday. Seeing that laugh did something to me. The last remnants of fear, the trembling in my knees, the nausea in my stomach evaporated. The survival math shifted. It was no longer about calculating the odds of winning. It was about calculating exactly how much pain I could inflict on that smile. I picked up my phone and texted Thorne. "They are here." He replied instantly. I am parking now. Meet me at the door. Do not engage until we are in the room. I grabbed the packet. I stepped out of the car. The heat hit me, but I felt cold. I felt dead calm. The lobby of the title company was cool and smelled of industrial carpet cleaner. Thorne met me by the water cooler. He looked impeccable in his charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy with authority. He didn't smile. He just nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement that we were about to walk off a cliff together. "They are in conference room B," the receptionist said, looking at us warily. She recognized me from my previous visit. "Are you expected?" "We are essential," Thorne said smoothly, and he walked past her before she could pick up the phone. I followed him down the hallway. The walls were lined with framed photos of happy families standing in front of sold signs. It was a gallery of the American dream, and we were here to slash the canvas. The door to conference room B was closed. I could hear the murmur of voices inside. Thorne looked at me. "Ready." I thought about the infusion log. I thought about the fake letter. "Open it," I said. Thorne opened the door. The room went silent. It was a long oval table. Frank sat at the head, a pen already in his hand. Brenda, the escrow officer, sat to his right, surrounded by stacks of paper. Greg Salisbury and Arthur Dent were on the left. At the far end sat a woman I didn't recognize, the mobile notary, presumably there to witness the final signatures. Frank looked up. His smile froze, then twisted into a scowl of genuine confusion. "Lillian," he said, "what the hell are you doing here?" I walked into the room. I didn't look at Frank. I looked at Brenda. "I am an interested party," I said, my voice steady, "and I am here to object to this closing." Arthur Dent stood up. He was taller than I expected, and he projected a wave of aggressive cologne. "You have no business here. Miss Parker," he said, his voice dropping an octave to sound commanding, "I sent you a cease and desist. If you do not leave immediately, I will have security remove you for trespassing." He looked at Thorne. "And you, counselor, you know better than to disrupt a private transaction." Thorne didn't blink. He walked to the table and set his briefcase down with a heavy thud. "This is not a private transaction," Thorne said. "It is the culmination of a fraud, and if you proceed, Mr. Dent, you will be burying yourself in a conspiracy charge." Frank stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Conspiracy. You are crazy. Get out. Get her out of here." He looked wildly at Greg. "Call the police." Thorne reached into his briefcase. He didn't rush. His movements were slow, deliberate, terrifyingly calm. He pulled out a document with a blue backing. "I am serving you, formally, with a notice of adverse claim," Thorne said, sliding the paper across the polished wood toward Brenda. "And this is a copy of the petition for injunction we have filed with the probate court." Brenda looked at the papers as if they were radioactive. She didn't touch them. Arthur Dent scoffed. "You filed a petition. Do you have an order? Do you have a judge's signature stopping this sale?" "We have a hearing on Tuesday," Thorne said. Dent laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "So you have nothing. You have a request, a wish list. That does not stop a closing. Counselor, unless you have an injunction, we are proceeding. Brenda, pass the deed." Brenda hesitated. She looked at Dent, then at Frank, then at the papers Thorne had slid toward her. I walked forward. I stood directly across from Frank. "You can sign it." "Frank," I said, "you can sign the deed. You can take the money." "Lillian." "Shut up," he hissed. "You are embarrassing yourself." "But," I continued, my voice rising just enough to cut through the tension, "if you sign that paper, you are committing a second felony. Because we know about the first one." I opened the manila envelope. I pulled out the first exhibit, the blown-up copy of the notary journal entry. "February 12th. I said, 10:30 in the morning. That is when Sarah Jenkins swore you and Mom signed the deed transferring the house." "Right." Frank's eyes flickered. He stared at the paper. So I pulled out the second exhibit, the infusion log. "This is the medical record from the oncology center." I said, "At 10:30 in the morning on February 12th, Mom was in a chair 5 miles away, receiving a drip of carboplatin. I let the paper fall onto the table. It drifted down and landed next to the notary journal. She was not at the kitchen table. Frank. She was dying, and she was nowhere near that notary. The room went absolutely still. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to vanish. Frank looked at the infusion log. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Arthur Dent picked up the infusion log. He scanned it. His confident, aggressive demeanor faltered for a fraction of a second. He looked at the date. He looked at the time. This could be a clerical error, Dent said, but his voice lacked conviction. Records are wrong all the time. It is certified. Thorne said, by the hospital custodian of records, it is admissible evidence, and it proves that the deed you are relying on for this sale, the deed that gave Mr. Miller the title, is a forgery. Thorne turned to Brenda. Brenda, he said gently, if you close this deal knowing that the underlying title is based on a forged instrument, the title insurance policy is void, and you, personally, become a party to the fraud. Brenda looked at the underwriter's manual on her desk. She looked at Frank. Can you explain this? Mr. Miller, she asked. Her voice was small, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gavel. Frank looked around the room. He looked trapped. The sweat started to bead on his forehead, right along the hairline. She came home early. He stammered. The nurse got the time wrong. It is an electronic log. Frank, I said, it scans her wristband. He glared at me with pure hatred. You ungrateful little bitch, he spat. Arthur Dent put a hand on Frank's arm. Frank, stop. But Frank shook him off. You think you are so smart? Frank yelled. You think you can just waltz in here and take everything? She wanted me to have it, she told me. Did she? I asked. I reached into the packet again. I pulled out the memorandum of the trust. This is the trust she created a year ago. I said, it lists the house as a specific bequest to me. I pulled out the recording transcript, and this, I said, is a transcript of a recording she made on her dictaphone, where she says she is scared of you, where she says you are yelling at her to sign papers. I threw the transcript on the table. Frank stared at it. She was confused. He shouted. He lunged toward the table, his hand clawing for the papers. She was on drugs. She didn't know what she was saying. You are twisting everything. He grabbed the packet of papers and threw them onto the floor. They scattered like confetti, the proof of his betrayal spreading across the carpet. You are ruining everything, he screamed. His face was purple. Veins bulged in his neck. Then, just as quickly as the rage had erupted, it collapsed. He slumped back into his chair. He put his face in his hands. And he started to sob. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was a loud, heaving, theatrical sobbing. I just wanted to do right by her. He wailed, his voice muffled by his palms. I am so lonely. You do not understand. Lillian, the house. It is too big. It has too many memories. I cannot live there without her. I just wanted to move on. Why are you doing this to me? I watched him. It was a performance. It was the same performance he had given at the funeral. The grieving widower crushed by the weight of loss. He was trying to pivot the room, to turn the emotional temperature from criminal accusation to family tragedy. I looked at the others. Greg Salisbury looked uncomfortable, shifting his gaze to the window. The mobile notary looked horrified, her stamp hovering over her own bag as if she wanted to put it away and run. But Brenda wasn't looking at Frank. She was looking at the infusion log. Arthur Dent cleared his throat. He was trying to salvage the shipwreck. Okay, he said, holding up a hand. Let's all take a breath. Obviously, there are some familial disputes here. He looked at Thorne. Counselor, we have a valid contract. My client has the cash wired and ready. If we stop now, everyone loses. Mr. Miller loses the sale. The buyer loses the property. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What if we proceed with the closing, but we hold the proceeds in escrow? We record the deed. The buyer takes possession, but we do not release the funds to Mr. Miller until this misunderstanding is resolved. He smiled at me. That protects your interest. Lillian, the money is safe, but the deal gets done. I looked at him. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was just after the money. If you record the deed, I said, the house is gone. The title passes to your LLC, and then you flip it next week to someone else, and I can never get it back. I am sure we can work out a stipulation. Dent began. No, Thorne said. He cut the air with his hand. Absolutely not. Thorne turned to Brenda. Brenda, my client does not consent to a holdback. We are asserting that the seller, Mr. Miller, has no valid title to convey. If you facilitate this transfer, you are knowingly recording a deed based on a breakage in the chain of title. Thorne paused, letting the weight of the next words hang in the air. And I will depose you. Brenda, if this closes today, I will put you on the stand and ask you why you ignored the evidence of forgery sitting right in front of you. Brenda went pale. She looked at Dent. I cannot do it, she said. Dent's eyes narrowed. Brenda, we have a contract. I need to call underwriting, she said, her voice shaking. She picked up the phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the internal extension. The room waited. Frank was still sniffling, but he was watching Brenda through his fingers. He knew. He knew the moment the underwriter got involved. The game was over. Brenda spoke into the receiver. Yes, I have a notice of adverse claim, and yes, I have evidence of a conflicting timeline for the notarization. A hospital log. She listened. She nodded. Okay, I understand. She hung up. She looked at Dent, then at Frank, and finally at me. We are issuing a stop order, she said. The underwriter has declined to insure the title. We cannot close. The silence that followed was total. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Gravity seemed to shift. The inevitability of the sale. The momentum of the money, it all crashed into a wall. Frank stood up. He didn't scream this time. He just looked small. The gray suit looked too big for him. You are making a mistake. He muttered. He looked at me. There was no love in his eyes. There was no stepfatherly concern. There was just the cold, dead stare of a stranger who had been caught. You will regret this, he said. He walked out of the room. He didn't look back. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Arthur Dent was yelling at Brenda. Greg Salisbury was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to find another property to pivot to. The mobile notary packed her bag and practically ran out the door. Thorne put a hand on my shoulder. You did it, he said quietly. I looked at the table. The papers were still scattered there. The infusion log, the journal, the truth. We stopped the sale. I said, but we didn't win. He still has the deed. We stopped the money. Thorne said, that is the only thing that matters to men like him. Now, we fight. We walked out of the conference room. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a shaking exhaustion. I felt like I had just run a marathon in high heels. We stepped out into the parking lot. The heat was suffocating now. Lillian, I turned. Greg Salisbury was jogging after us. He looked sweaty and desperate. Wait up, he called. Thorne stepped between me and him. Mr. Salisbury, my client has nothing to say to you. Greg held up his hands. Look, no lawyers. Just talk to me for a second. He looked at me. Lillian, look, this is a mess. A total mess. Clearly Frank has some issues. We didn't know. We are legitimate investors. You are vultures. I said. Greg winced. Okay, fair enough. But we are vultures with cash. He lowered his voice. My partners. They really want this property. They have a crew ready to start on Monday. This delay is costing us. So walk away. I said, how about this? Greg said. He looked around to make sure Dent wasn't listening. We cut Frank out. We deal with you. You sign the quitclaim. We pay you $50,000. I stared at him. $50,000. That is cash. Lillian, today, you walk away with $50,000. You can start over. No court battles. No fighting with your stepdad. Just a clean break. Thorne started to speak. Mr. Salisbury, that is inappropriate. I silenced Thorne with a look. 50,000, I asked. Greg nodded eagerly. 60. I can probably get them to go to 60. Think about it. That is 2 years of salary for you, right? I looked at the asphalt. $60,000. I could move. I could buy a new car. I could pay off my student loans. I could erase the struggle of the last 10 years. All I had to do was let them have the house, let them gut it, let them tear out the carpets where I played as a child, let them paint over the height chart on the kitchen door frame, let them erase my mother. I looked at Greg. I saw the greed in his eyes. It wasn't malicious. It was just banal. He didn't care about the fraud. He didn't care about the truth. He just wanted the asset. I thought about the letter in my pocket, the one Frank had forged. Please do not fight, Frank. If I took the money, I would be doing exactly what the lie told me to do. I would be selling my mother's legacy for a relocation fee. I looked at the building behind him. I saw Frank sitting in his Lexus, his head against the steering wheel. It is not for sale, I said. Greg sighed. Lillian, be realistic. The legal fees alone will eat up the equity. Even if you win, you lose. I am not doing this for the equity, I said. Then what he asked, genuinely confused. What is the point? I looked him in the eye. The point is that she said no. Greg blinked. What, my mother? I said. She said no to him. She refused to sign. She fought him until she was too weak to speak. If I sell it to you now, I am saying her no didn't matter. I stepped back. Go tell your partners the deal is dead. And tell Arthur Dent that if he contacts me again, I will add him to the conspiracy lawsuit. Greg shook his head. You are making a mistake. Maybe, I said, but it is my mistake to make. I turned and walked to my car. Thorne walked beside me. That was impressive, Thorne said, and expensive. I opened my car door. The heat inside was stifling, but I didn't care. I need to go to work, I said. I have a shift at 2. Thorne smiled, a rare, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I will file the list pendants on Tuesday. Lillian, we have them on the run. I nodded. I got into the car and watched Thorne drive away. Then I watched Greg walk back to his car, shaking his head. I looked at Frank's Lexus. He was still sitting there. I put the car in gear and drove past him. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I knew what he looked like. He looked like a man who had bet everything on a lie and rolled snake eyes. I drove out of the lot and onto the main road. My hands were shaking again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was the aftershock of adrenaline. I had stopped the closing. I had held the line. But as I drove, the reality set in. The house wasn't mine. It was in legal limbo. I was still broke. I was still evicted. I was still sleeping in a basement. And Frank wasn't done. A man like that, a man who would forge a dying woman's signature, didn't just give up. He would come back. He would find another angle. I reached into my bag and touched the recorder. If anything happens, call the name on the card. I had called the name. I had fought the battle, but the war was just starting. I pulled into the parking lot of the warehouse. I had 10 minutes before my shift. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I could see the house in my mind, the way the light hit the cedar chest in the afternoon, the way the floorboards creaked in the hallway. I wondered if the cedar chest was still in the garage, or if Frank had already sold it. I opened my eyes. I wasn't going to cry. I was done crying. I checked my phone. There was a voicemail. I hesitated. Was it Frank? Was it the buyer? I pressed play. Ms. Parker, this is Detective Henderson from the Fraud Division. We received a call from a Mr. Marcus Thorne regarding a potential forgery and elder abuse case. I'd like to take a statement. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The police. Thorne hadn't waited for Tuesday. He had called them immediately. I looked at the warehouse. I looked at the grim gray walls where I traded my hours for dollars. I wasn't just a warehouse worker anymore. I was a witness. I got out of the car, smoothed down my black dress, and walked toward the time clock. I was ready. The flashing lights of the police cruiser were not the frantic, spinning red and blues of an emergency. They were silent, steady, and amber. reflecting off the plate glass windows of the title company office like a slow heartbeat. It was not a raid, it was a report. Brenda, the escrow officer, had done exactly what a terrified corporate employee does when faced with a felony in her conference room. She called her manager, and her manager called the non-emergency line to file a report of attempted fraud involving a recorded instrument. I stood by the water cooler, watching the scene unfold through the glass wall of conference room B. It felt like watching a play where the actors had forgotten their lines. 2 officers were in the room. They were not aggressive. They were bored. One was taking notes on a small pad while Arthur Dent, the buyer's attorney, spoke in low, rapid tones, gesturing with his expensive pen. Frank sat in the corner. He had stopped crying. Now, he just looked deflated, like a balloon that had been left in the sun too long. He was slumped in the ergonomic chair, staring at the carpet where the infusion log still lay. Thorne stood next to me. "This is the pivot point," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Up until 10 minutes ago, this was a civil dispute." Thorne said, "It was family drama." But the moment the police stepped in, it became a matter of public record. Frank cannot just walk away and say it was a misunderstanding. He is now a suspect in a criminal investigation. I looked at Frank. I wanted to feel triumph. I wanted to feel the surge of victory that movies promise you when the villain is cornered. But I did not feel victorious. I felt exhausted. I felt a deep, hollow sadness that this man, who had once carved the turkey at our Thanksgiving table, was now being questioned by a uniformed officer about forging my dead mother's signature. The door opened. The officers walked out, followed by Dent and Frank. One of the officers, a man with gray hair and a tired face, approached us. "You are the daughter?" he asked. I said, "Lillian Parker." "And you are the attorney Marcus Thorne?" "I represent the estate." The officer nodded. "We have the documents you provided, the journal copy and the hospital logs. We are going to impound the original notary journal from the mobile notary before she leaves town." He looked at me. "Mr. Miller is claiming this is a misunderstanding." The officer said, "He claims he had verbal permission from your mother to handle her affairs, and that the dates were just a clerical error." "A clerical error," I repeated, my voice rising. "He forged her signature while she was getting chemotherapy." "I know," the officer said. Raising a hand, "I am just telling you what he said. We are not arresting anyone today. We need to interview the notary and subpoena the hospital records officially. But I will tell you this, nobody is selling that house today. The title company has flagged the property." He turned to look at Frank, who was standing by the exit. Refusing to make eye contact with me, "We advise you to stay in town." "Mr. Miller?" the officer called out. Frank flinched. He didn't answer. He pushed open the glass door and walked out into the heat, his gray suit looking wrinkled and cheap in the ruthless sunlight. Arthur Dent stopped in front of me. "This is not over," he said. He didn't sound confident anymore. He sounded like a man trying to convince himself. "You have clouded the title, Miss Parker. But you haven't won the war. My client has rights. Your client is a shell company for a predatory lending ring." I said. Dent's eyes narrowed. He looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't dismissiveness, it was recognition. He realized, finally, that I wasn't just a grieving daughter, I was a threat. He walked away without another word. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and revelation. Thorne was right. The police report triggered a chain reaction. The title company's underwriter did a deep dive into the property history, and because Thorne had flagged the pattern of the notary, they started looking at other transactions involving Sarah Jenkins and Halloway Associates. On Monday afternoon, I sat in Thorne's office. He had a whiteboard set up. It was covered in red marker. "It is ugly." "Lillian," he said. "How ugly?" Thorne uncapped the marker. We pulled the public records for every deed notarized by Sarah Jenkins in the last 2 years. He said, "There are 42 of them." 42. Thorne nodded. "And 30 of them follow the exact same pattern as your mother's house." He drew a circle on the board. Step 1. A vulnerable homeowner, usually elderly, usually sick, or recently deceased. He drew an arrow. Step 2. A property consultant approaches the family. Or, in Frank's case, a family member is recruited. They offer to handle the messy legal stuff for a fee, or they offer a quick cash buyout. He drew another arrow. Step 3. A deed is recorded, transferring the property to a flipper LLC. The deed is always notarized by Jenkins, and often, the dates don't line up with reality. He tapped the board. We found one in the next county. A woman with dementia signed over her farm 3 days after she was admitted to a secure memory care unit. The notary journal said she signed it at her kitchen table. It is a factory, I whispered. Exactly, Thorne said. Holloway Associates provides the legal veneer. Premier Property Consulting finds the marks. Sarah Jenkins provides the stamps, and Blue Horizon Holdings provides the cash to wash the title. And Frank, I asked, where does he fit in? Thorne looked at me sympathetically. Frank is a resource. He said, to them, he is just a bird dog. He brought them the lead. He brought them your mother's house. In exchange, they probably promised to pay off his gambling debts and give him a cut of the equity. I felt sick. Frank wasn't the mastermind. He was just a desperate, weak man who had sold us out to a machine. But why did he do it, I asked. Why hate me so much? Thorne sat down. I spoke to his lawyer this morning. He said, Frank has a lawyer, a criminal defense attorney. Thorne said, Holloway cut him loose. They are claiming they had no idea Frank was forging documents. They are throwing him under the bus to save the firm. Of course they are. I said, but Frank is sticking to his story. Thorne said, he told his lawyer that he deserves that money. He told them that you abandoned your mother. I stared at Thorne. I abandoned her. I was there every day for 6 months in his head. Lillian, you left 5 years ago. Thorne said, you went to Chicago. You built a life. He stayed. He mowed the lawn. He fixed the roof. He drove her to appointments before she got really sick. He believes that sweat equity makes him the owner. He has convinced himself that your return at the very end was just you coming back for the inheritance. He truly believes it. I said, yes, Thorne said. That is what makes him dangerous. He does not think he is stealing. He thinks he is collecting a debt. I looked at the whiteboard. The red lines looked like veins. So what happens to the house, I asked. Thorne sighed. The title company has placed a hard hold on the escrow. Blue Horizon has formally withdrawn their offer. They want nothing to do with a criminal investigation. So the sale is dead. The sale is dead. Thorne confirmed, but the house is in limbo. We filed the lis pendens today. We also filed a petition to reopen the probate and to void the February 12th deed. How long will that take? Thorne grimaced. The court system moves like a glacier. Lillian, especially with a criminal investigation running parallel. It could be months, maybe a year. A year. And until a judge signs an order voiding that deed, Frank is still technically on the title as a joint tenant. You cannot sell it. He cannot sell it. It just sits there. It is a crime scene. I said, yes, Thorne said, but at least it is still standing. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the sheriff's department. Because of the ongoing dispute and the restraining order I had requested, neither Frank nor I was allowed to live in the house, but the court had granted me a 4-hour window to retrieve essential personal items. I had to be escorted by a deputy. I met the deputy at the house on a Tuesday morning. The grass was overgrown. The for sale sign Frank had planted in the yard was gone, leaving a jagged hole in the earth. The deputy was a young woman named Officer Ruiz. She was polite but detached. You have 4 hours. Ma'am, she said, checking her watch. Do not take anything attached to the walls. No appliances. Just personal effects. I unlocked the door. The smell hit me first. It was the smell of a house that had been closed up in the summer heat. Stale air, dust, and the faint, lingering scent of my mother's lavender detergent. I walked into the living room. It was empty. The movers had taken almost everything before I stopped them. The sofa was gone. The cedar chest was gone. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. It felt ghostly. This was the place where I had learned to walk, where I had cried over teenage breakups. where I had sat with my mother and watched game shows. Now, it felt like a museum of a life that had been canceled. I went to my mother's bedroom. The bed was gone. The mattress was gone. Frank had been thorough. I walked to the closet. There were a few hangers left, wire skeletons rattling on the rod. I felt a wave of grief so strong I had to lean against the wall. I had won the battle at the title company, but I had lost the home. The structure was here, but the soul had been stripped out and sold for cash. Officer Ruiz stood in the doorway. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just memories." I knelt down near the corner of the room, by the radiator. When I was a little girl, I used to hide things here. I had a loose baseboard behind the nightstand where I would stash my diary or candy I wasn't supposed to have. I wondered if it was still loose. I pulled the nightstand away from the wall. It scraped loudly. I felt along the trim. The wood was warped. I pulled. The piece of baseboard popped off. There was a dark, hollow space behind it. I reached in. My fingers brushed against dust bunnies and something smooth. Paper. I pulled it out. It was a small, white envelope. It wasn't sealed. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, her real handwriting. Strong and looped, it said, "Lily." My hands shook. I opened it. There was a single sheet of yellow legal paper inside. "My darling girl, if you are reading this, then things have gone wrong. I hope you never have to look here. I hope Frank proves me wrong. But I'm writing this because I am scared. He is talking to people. He is on the phone late at night with a woman named Karen. I hear them talking about equity and quick sales. He thinks I'm asleep. He thinks I'm too sick to understand. I went to Mr. Thorne and made the trust. I tried to protect you, but Frank is angry. Lily, he looks at me like I'm a burden. He looks at this house like it is a winning lottery ticket. I want you to know that I never signed anything giving him this house. If he says I did, he is lying. The house is yours. It has always been yours. Be strong. You are so much stronger than you think. Love, Mom. I sat on the floor and read the note 3 times. It wasn't a legal document. It wouldn't void a deed on its own. But it was the truth. It was the vindication I had been starving for. Frank hadn't just tricked her. She knew. She had spent her final weeks lying in that bed, pretending to be asleep, listening to her husband plot to sell the roof over her head. The cruelty of it took my breath away. But she had fought back. She had hidden this note in the one place she knew only I would look. It was a time capsule of her love and her warning. Officer Ruiz stepped into the room. "We have about 30 minutes, she said. I stood up. I wiped my face. I have what I came for. I said, I put the note in my pocket. I didn't take any clothes. I didn't take any trinkets. I took the truth. I walked out of the house. I locked the door. Officer Ruiz put a seal on the doorframe, a strip of orange tape that said, "Evidence. Do not enter." It looked like the eviction notice I had found weeks ago. But this time, it wasn't locking me out. It was locking Frank out. I got into my car. My phone rang. It was Thorne. "Lillian, are you sitting down? I am in the car." I said, "What is it?" "We just got a motion from Frank's new lawyer." Thorne said, "What now? Is he trying to claim the house again?" "No," Thorne said. "He is attacking the trust. What they are filing a counterclaim alleging undue influence. They are claiming that I, the attorney, manipulated your mother into creating the trust to cut Frank out. They are claiming she was mentally incompetent when she signed the trust documents a year ago." I gripped the phone. "That is a lie. She was fine a year ago." "I know," Thorne said. "But it is a scorched earth tactic. If they can invalidate the trust, then the house falls into the general estate, and since Frank is the surviving spouse, under state law, he would get half of everything if there is no will or trust." "He wants half," I asked. "After forging a deed, he knows he is going to lose the forged deed." Thorne said, "The police have the journal, so now he is trying to blow up the lifeboat. He is trying to destroy the trust so he can salvage a payout from the wreckage. Can he do that? He can try." Thorne said, "It means we have to go to trial. We have to depose her doctors. We have to bring in witnesses to prove she was sane. It is going to be ugly. Lillian, they are going to drag her medical history through the mud. Let them—" I said, Lillian, it will be expensive. I don't care. I said, I have the note. Thorn. What note? I found a note, hidden in the wall. She wrote it. She says explicitly that she did not sign anything for Frank and that she was scared of him. Thorn was silent for a moment. Is it dated? No. It might be considered hearsay, Thorn warned. But it shows state of mind. It shows she was lucid enough to be suspicious. Bring it to me, Thorn said. We will attach it to our response. I will be there in 20 minutes. I said. I drove to the courthouse. Thorn was meeting me there to file the latest batch of motions. I parked the car and walked up the wide stone steps. The courthouse was massive, indifferent, a monument to the slow grinding gears of society. I felt small. I was one woman, with one lawyer, fighting a crime ring and a desperate ex-stepfather. The survival math was getting harder. My savings were gone. I was living on credit cards. I was tired. I met Thorn in the lobby. I handed him the envelope with the note. He read it. He nodded slowly. This helps, he said. It gives her a voice. Juries like voices. He went to the clerk's window to file. I waited on a wooden bench near the exit. I watched people come and go, lawyers in suits, families in tears, people holding speeding tickets. I felt a presence next to me. I looked up. A woman was standing there. She was older than me, maybe 50. She wore a faded cardigan and held a plastic bag full of papers. She looked tired. She looked like I felt. Excuse me, she said. Her voice was quiet. Are you Lillian Parker? I tensed. I thought about the anonymous text. Don't go tomorrow. Who are you? I asked. My name is Sarah. She said, not the notary, just Sarah. She sat down on the edge of the bench. I was in the courtroom last week, she said, for a traffic thing. I heard the clerk talking about your case, the Parker estate, and the name of the law firm. Holloway. I looked at her. My aunt died last year. Sarah said. She lived on the west side. She had a small house. Paid off. She gripped the plastic bag. When she got sick, a man came to see her. He said he was a consultant. He said he could help her get equity out of the house to pay for her care. Premier Property Consulting, I asked. She nodded. My aunt signed some papers. Sarah said, she thought it was a loan. But when she died, we found out she had sold the house for $10,000. $10,000? I whispered. The deed was notarized by a woman named Jenkins. Sarah said, and the buyer was an LLC called Blue Horizon. I felt a chill go down my spine. We tried to fight it. Sarah said, but the lawyer, Holloway, he sent us letters. He threatened to sue us. We didn't have any money, so we let it go. She looked at me, and her eyes were full of tears. We let them take it. I reached out and touched her arm. I am fighting them. I said, I know. Sarah said, that is why I came over. I wanted to tell you. You are not the only one. There are others. I know a neighbor who lost her dad's place the same way. She opened her plastic bag and pulled out a piece of paper with a phone number on it. This is my number, she said. If you need a witness, or if you need someone to stand with you. I took the paper. Thank you. I said. Thorn walked up to us. He looked at Sarah, then at me. Everything okay? He asked. I stood up. I looked at the note from my mother in Thorn's hand. I looked at the phone number Sarah had given me. I realized then that the note wasn't just a message for me. It was a permission slip. My mother had been scared, but she had been sharp. She had seen the trap, and now I saw the whole board. It wasn't just about my mother's house anymore. It wasn't just about Frank. This was a class action. I looked at Thorn. We are not just filing a response. I said. Thorn raised an eyebrow. No. I said. I looked at Sarah. We are going to find the others. Thorn looked from me to Sarah. He saw the fire in my eyes. He saw the exhaustion turning into something else, something sustainable. Okay, Thorn said. He smiled. A shark-like smile that I finally appreciated. Let's find them. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. I didn't have my house keys. I didn't have my mother's cedar chest. I didn't have my inheritance. But I had a mission. I walked to my car, breathed through the fear, and drove forward without knowing who else would come for me next. But I knew one thing for sure when they came: I wouldn't be alone. Thank you so much for listening to Lillian's story. It has been a journey through the darkest parts of grief and the cold machinery of the legal system. But I hope it showed that even when the odds are stacked against you, the truth is worth fighting for. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this series and want to hear more stories about justice, betrayal, and the fight for what is right, please subscribe to Revenge Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And finally, I want to know what you think. Should Lillian settle for the house, or should she go after the entire ring of scammers? Share your thoughts in English in the comments. Until next time, stay safe and keep fighting.